Perfect. And can we see that PowerPoint? Amazing. It's all coming together. Thank you for your patience this afternoon, morning. I'm in Atlantic Canada, so it's afternoon for me. Whew. Thank you folks for being here. My name is Mariah Darling, and I am the education coordinator for Chroma, New Brunswick. I use all pronouns, so for anyone who needs to practice, I am a great place to do that. I was born and raised in St. John, New Brunswick, and I received my Bachelor of Science from the University of New Brunswick in St. John. I'm a queer and trans young professional, and my background is in medical research, and that's what I did before coming to Chroma as their education coordinator. It seems a little bit random that I would start these sessions talking about my background in medical research, but I always do because one of the things I'm really good at is taking some ideas that for some folks may seem too complex or too out of reach and bringing us all to a place where we get on the same baseline and really understand the basic ideas of what we're trying to talk about. Awesome. So first of all, this workshop over the next hour is going to be a brave space. Has anyone heard that term before? Looking for the chats. I'm not seeing any yeses. So I love to teach. Has anyone heard the term safe space? Which I think a lot of folks would be more familiar with. Amazing. So brave space is kind of like almost a level 2 of safe space. In a lot of these spaces where we're using, especially thinking of being in public, being in our cities, being, out in our lives, we should have safety. And that shouldn't be kind of our ultimate goal. We need to be working towards these places where we're not only safe, but we can thrive, we can try new things, we can show up as our full selves and really grow and continue to learn. So how that works in this workshop is we all learn a little bit differently. Some people are going to feel, like wanting to interact and be very active that way. And some folks may want to just sit and listen. And I'm more than happy to talk. But it's really important to take a moment just at the beginning of these kind of learnings and know where we're not all necessarily learning the same way. We are all kind of okay with our neighbors taking the information how they need to and at the pace they need to take it. Awesome. We're just going to have a couple quick reflective questions here, and I hope some folks may be comfortable sharing their own experience with some of these in the chat. So I'd love for folks, if they're comfortable, to talk about the first time they remember learning that people were lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer. Because I know for me, I do remember this moment. I was early elementary school, and my mom had a tabloid magazine sitting out on the kitchen table. And it said in big letters the word gay. And it was the early 2000s, so it was a picture of Ellen DeGeneres. And I remember having to ask my mom what the word meant. And not only did I not know what the word meant, but I had no concept of the actual definition. I had no idea until my mom explaining that to me that any kind of relationship existed outside of one that looked like my parents, which is interesting to think of now because people are, because the community's all around us, knowing that now it feels silly, but as a kid, it was something so far out of reach. When I see in the chat, oh, hi, Renee, about 9 years old, cousin came out, yeah. I love that. A lot of these are coming from family members. I got some from media and also family, but it just kind of helps emphasize that we're all coming from really different places and different levels of knowing, which is why sometimes we can get into these cycles of misinformation and fear and everything. And we just, need to take some of these moments to be a little bit vulnerable and empathetic with each other and think, how can everyone feel a bit in the circles we're in? And I do want to just quickly ask as well, when's the first time you remember learning that folks were transgender or gender diverse? For me, it was a lot later. I didn't hear about any sort of gender diversity until high school, probably. And it was watching Degrassi. Adam from Degrassi was a trans man. And even thinking back to that, the way he bound his chest in the show was super dangerous. It is not how anyone should bind their chest. And it was never addressed in the show. So for a series of or a group of kids growing up, one of their only kind of representations of any sort of trans person was showing them how to do something that was actually unsafe. So it's important just to recognize, where we're getting some of this information, and some of it may not be as reputable as we may hope. And I'm seeing a lot of similar kinds of answers way later. Yes, university, gender diversity about 2018. Absolutely. And it is something that has been almost perceived as this new idea. But if we think even back further, and we'll get into this a bit more in a couple slides, and think about two-spirit folks in our indigenous communities, gender diversity has been around for a long, long time, since before colonizers got here, and we really there's really been stringent gender roles kind of put into place that we're finally kind of breaking down and bringing back to how it was. Perfect. So we're going to jump right into things here with what is an ally. So what does that even mean? Perfect. So thinking of allyship within the lens of the rainbow community, an ally is someone who does not identify as 2S LGBTQ plus, but who is supportive. And that support isn't enough to say, yeah, I support or I like gay and trans people. You kind of have to put your money where your mouth is and make sure you're making those actions of allyship, supporting civil rights, gender equality, standing up to homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. That's the important part there. And that's not to say you kind of have to do anything outlandish or too much. A simple, we don't do that here, goes a really long way. And I really like to break down allyship a little bit more into four A's, because allyship or being an ally is less of an identity and really more of a process we go through. Awesome. So here are the four A's that I like to do around allyship. This first one, awareness. Probably the simplest one. There's a problem. You look over, you're like, hey, that's not right. Then you have your next day analysis. So you see the problem, but you know why it's a problem. So they don't use that pronoun that someone's calling them. That's hate speech. XYZ. You can tell what the problem is and why. You have that third A, acting. So that's that putting your money where your mouth is and taking that step. Again, can be as simple, we don't do that here. And it really does. Just taking that line goes a really long, long way. And then we have the last day for accountability, or the last day of allyship, which is accountability, and probably my favorite aspect of this model. Reflecting, continuing learning, and adjusting based on new information, which is super, super important. I hope that we are all people who want to learn and grow, and I certainly don't want to be the same person I am 5 years from now that I am today. And that really has a lot to do with that accountability step, you know, based with new reputable information, making sure you are comfortable changing and leaning into some of that discomfort that comes with making a change, even when it's good, versus staying comfortable and doubling down on the thing that maybe won't make people feel good around you, which is super, super important. A good example I like to use for that one, I often think about when I was running around in middle school with all my lovely dumb friends, and we would call everything so gay. That was kind of the bit at the time. And I remember even by the time I got to high school, being mortified with myself. you know. Certainly my intentions wasn't to make people feel bad, but knowing that the words I was using in my language could really hurt the people around me. So then there's that accountability moment. Am I just going to keep saying this phrase that kind of just comes out of my mouth and is part of um, our language right now, or am I going to, be a little bit vulnerable with myself and recognize that, ugh, that probably isn't making people feel very good, and lean into the discomfort that is making changes and rewiring some of these language points in our mind. It's just really important to help people to be able to show up and be themselves, and really help the people around us thrive at the same time. Perfect. So this is my rainbow acronym, 2S LGBTQIA plus. Uh, there are many different versions that mean the same thing: LGBTQ plus, 2S LGBTQ plus. Um, it is important just to definitely recognize there is a huge power in having language to describe yourself. And as the English language grows and people learn more, there are definitely more nuances and more identities we can use. It's just being cognizant of the way language works. Anyway, enough of that spiel. We are going to quickly run through this rainbow acronym, and then after we go through the whole thing, we're going to touch on a few of the identities and terms that maybe folks are less familiar with. So we've got our 2S, which is two spirit, L, lesbian, G, gay, B, bisexual, and sometimes folks consider pansexual included within that. T for the transgender and non-binary folks. That Q can stand for queer or questioning. The I for intersex. A for asexual. And of course, that plus means many more. Again, thinking back to language and how it's constantly evolving and growing. So first, and the first one I really do want to go over, and important to kind of go over first, is the term two-spirit. Um, two-spirit is a term that can definitely mean different things depending on the individual. The important part, really, it is a term for Indigenous folks. Um, and again, there's different nuances to it, but in general, it means someone who has both male and female energies and recognizes both within themselves. That can have to do with sexuality or gender, again, depending on the individual and where they're from. But it's really important to know this is specific to Indigenous folks and in Indigenous communities. And again, thinking of the fact, this isn't a new concept. This has been around for thousands of years, and we're not kind of coming into new genders. We're really breaking down some of these barriers and coming back into some of what we had. So to quickly go over transgender for some folks who maybe aren't familiar with these terms, uh, so transgender means your gender identity does not match up with your sex assigned at birth. So your gender identity being your concept of yourself, and your sex assigned at birth is, you were born and the doctor looks at you and based on what they see say it's a boy or it's a girl. So that for a trans person, again, that just doesn't match up. We've got the word queer, which is super important to go over because it was initially used as a slur, but has definitely been reclaimed a lot in the last 10 or so years. I think a lot of that has to do with how open the term is, which is really, really nice for folks. It essentially just means not straight or not cisgendered, which leaves a lot of openness in folks identifying. I think sometimes there's this idea in the queer community, or this perception of the queer and trans plus community, that sometimes if you don't have the right check boxes marked off, you can't claim a certain identity. And I think queer takes away some of that pressure around things. I like to tell people it keeps a little bit of mystery still around us, which I like. It is super important, though, to recognize its history and how it's been kind of weaponized and used in the past. And one of my biggest pieces of advice, especially for folks um, who are allies or from outside of the rainbow community, is just to let people self-identify as queer before calling them queer is a good default to use, especially thinking of maybe some older folks who may have experienced this being used as a slur, which would be a lot heavier. And it's not to say, you won't make a mistake or say it to someone who maybe doesn't like the term, but it's always about being willing and able to adjust when someone tells you how they identify or how they want to be addressed. At the end of the day, and I'll probably say this a few times through our session, a lot of things come back to kindergarten rules, um, which is really great. Perfect. Just losing track of myself. Awesome. Okay. So intersex. I think we can all agree gender is not on a spectrum. It's not black and white, male and female. Sexuality is also on a spectrum, not black and white, gay or straight. We know there's many things in between. So it shouldn't be much of a shock that when it comes down to our biological sex, it actually is also on a spectrum depending on how you develop your chromosomes, your hormone levels, your physical anatomy. You can actually fall in between biologically male and female. And then the last one I'm going to go over on this slide is the term asexual. So folks experience different kind of attractions. We have our physical attraction, which I like to say is the I like to hug and kiss you kind of attraction, and then our emotional attraction, which is more I want to sit down and share my brain with you kind of attraction. And for folks who are asexual, they experience to some lesser degree that physical attraction. Amazing. Is there anything, and feel free to be shooting questions or comments and anything in the chat if you think of something. Is there anything anyone is feeling, thinking, have questions on before I kind of keep going? Perfect. I'm gonna get moving on. Perfect. So this is my transgender umbrella. I really like it because it's a really nice kind of visual representation of it's a nice visual representation that I find helps break down sometimes some stereotypes we have or some ideas we have around transgender people or being trans. I find a lot of the times, when we mention transgender folks, a lot of people think of that left hand side of the umbrella, the binary side only, and trans men and trans women. But when we look at that, we can see clearly there's so many other identities on that other side that it's important that we don't discount or we don't think that there are these strict rules when it comes to being transgender. So we have our non-binary, no, sorry, we have our non-binary identities within being trans as well. We have genderqueer, again, thinking of that word queer, just not cisgendered. Demi boy and demi girl, two terms that are similar to trans masculine and trans feminine. So you relate to, or you identify with being masculine or feminine, but not the full extent as identifying as a binary man or woman. You have neutros, which is a more neutral gender fluid, where your gender can change on the day depending on your feeling or your concept of yourself. And of course, many more again with the nuances of English language. And for folks who maybe are seeing some of these identities for the first time, don't panic. There's no quiz at the end of this for sure. Certainly, as we go through some of these slides today, I'm going to be giving you a lot of information, and I'm not expecting anyone to leave an expert or memorizing every single term and identity. It's more so having a moment to be exposed to it, to know that there are non-binary genders within being trans, to have some of these tools in your back pocket to ask some questions and listen to folks and just build more so on that empathy piece. And we'll get more into that later. Yes. Awesome. So I'm going to ask a couple quick questions here, and I'd love if folks can think of something just to just throw it in the chat. Um, can anyone think of one historical figure that was lesbian, gay, or bisexual? We'll give a few seconds here. Katie Lang. A lot of second challenge while folks are thinking too. Can anyone think of one historical figure that was trans or non-binary, or even gender diverse? Oh, Harvey Milk's a very good one for the first one. And I'll let them keep rolling in while people kind of think and brainstorm. I really love asking these couple questions, and I ask them in every workshop I do, no matter the group or no matter the age, because generally it goes within the same pattern. I'll ask the questions. There'll be a little bit of silence, and then generally someone will name an artist or musician. Um, and without there's been so many people throughout history that have made real contributions to the world at large, not just within queer and trans plus rights in history. Number 5, Harvey Milk's a great example that was thrown in the chat there. Another one I like to think of is Alan Turing. Alan Turing cracked the Enigma code, helped defeat the Nazis during the war. And when he went back to England, he was so persecuted specifically for being gay that he ended up killing himself. And I think of how many times throughout school we learn about the world wars and we talk about these stories, and this one isn't really shared as much. For trans or gender diverse or non-binary folks, yeah, Marsha P. Johnson, I see in the chat there, a very good example, helped to initiate the Stonewall riots in the States. And if I think back even further, I think about Joan of Arc as a gender diverse person because she was persecuted for, dressing unlike a woman or acting unlike a woman, specifically. So we have a lot of these stories throughout history, and it's important that we take some moments and recognize them and talk about them. Especially thinking about weeks like this where we're learning so much and getting inspired and thinking about action items. It's hard to think of yourself making a difference or being able to contribute when you never hear stories about people like you doing that. So having these moments and recognizing these stories and taking a moment to Google a couple different histories can be really important to really perpetuating this idea that queer and trans plus people have been here, and gender diverse and non-binary folks, we've been here for a long time, and we have made contributions, we are making contributions, and we will make contributions to really change our societies in this world. Amazing. So this is my pal, the gender unicorn. I really like this visual because it's a nice little list, and I am a very analytical type. So if you look on that right-hand side there, right at the top, we've got gender identity that's represented by that little rainbow that we can also see in that thought bubble there. That's because gender identity is your inside concept of yourself. It's how you think of you, the how you relate to being a female or woman or masculine or a man or another gender that you relate to. It's that internal concept of yourself, which is a very personal thing. And then you have your gender expression, which is represented by those green dots on the outside there, which is how you take that gender identity, that internal feeling, and put it on the outside. So it's the clothes you wear, it's your haircut, it is the way you walk, the way you talk, it's the things that people can see is your gender expression. Then you have your sex assigned at birth. So female, male, and we know it's not quite that black and white. So we have other or intersex. And then we have our attraction. So our physical attraction, which is again that I want to hug and kiss you, and that emotional attraction, which is sitting down and sharing those kind of brain and more feeling moments. I really like this gender unicorn for a few reasons. One, it has aspects of gender identity, and then if we go kind of to the bottom, also our attractions or sexuality. Which is a really nice and clear way to show that one really doesn't affect the other. No matter where I kind of put my little dot for gender identity at the top of the list, it doesn't change where I have to put things for my attractions. So it's just important to know, we do have gender and we do have sexuality, but one doesn't kind of innately inform the other. Another reason I really like this gender unicorn um, is because if everyone on here sat down and took a moment and kind of put a dot where they thought on every aspect, I think we're reading at 73 folks in the chat here now. I think we'd have 73 slightly different gender unicorns. And even if we sat down a group of women together and they all did the gender unicorn, they would all look very different, or men or non-binary folks. We would have so many different things because humans are so unique at the end of the day. And I just think it's important that we have these moments of reflection and these moments to be like, to remind ourselves that individualism and that uniqueness extends to the queer plus and trans plus community, because I find sometimes maybe we add more boxes there when we're all just out here being unique humans. Perfect. I'm just going to briefly talk about this one. So this is about Bill C-16 that some folks may be familiar with. This passed in 2017 to add gender identity and expression to the Federal Human Rights Code, which is very important, again, thinking of what that represents. And also important to note that it's really sorry, let me start that over. It's really important to recognize that, while federally that was adopted by Bill C-16, it's important that provinces and territories add gender identity expression to their own human rights code, thinking about the fact that they control the healthcare system, the education system, these places where there's a lot more chance for vulnerability. You need to receive services, and it's really hard to do when you feel like you have to hide yourself or you can't present as the full you or be honest. Here in New Brunswick, our human rights code has been updated. There we go. Has been updated to include gender identity expression, luckily, and it's super important to recognize as people move through some of these systems. I think what hits me the hardest thinking about this is, first of all, this came in 2017, and while I look a little bit young, that is well past my time in the education system. So thinking about the protections that weren't there, and thinking specifically and especially about gender expression and the fact that before 2017, if what you were putting on the outside, so what you're showing people in your clothes and the way you had your hair and all these things that show sorry, all these things that you're showing to other people that people can see, if they didn't fit into a certain script or stereotype, you were open to be discriminated against. Like thinking of things like gendered work uniforms, where you were forced to wear a certain cut, or different things that can make people feel really uncomfortable in the systems that they have to do. And again, thinking back to kindergarten rules, if at the end of the day, what you need to show up somewhere and really be able to thrive and really be able to feel safe and like your full self doesn't hurt you and doesn't hurt anyone else, we should not only be allowing it, but we should be encouraging it and really helping people be their best self. Because, again, thinking of that gender expression and thinking of the shirts you're wearing, thinking of the way you're talking, thinking of your haircut, that's not hurting anyone. And that's really going to help us all come together. I'm a rugby player by trade, so I like to work smart, not hard. And when everyone can show up as their full self and they're not worried about disclosing too much or outing themselves or all these things that go on the back of your head, we can all contribute to our fullest and we can get so much further in this world so much easier. And I think that's something to really strive for. Awesome. So queer plus and trans plus are two terms I've likely used throughout this, so I thought I'd explain it right in the middle. Um, so the plus label is just trying to include all identities and labels regarding gender and sexuality. We know queer and trans are both big kind of general umbrella terms. Um, and again, it's those plus signs are just trying to be inclusive of all non-cis heteronormative individuals. And that is a long, kind of intimidating word that just means including all people who are not straight or not cisgendered, um, which is really nice. And that plus sign also is trying to acknowledge intersectionality within the rainbow community. So thinking about other identities that affect folks moving throughout the world, like race, socioeconomic status, disability status, gender and sexuality, of course. These things that really come together that you can't separate when people are going through and being perceived and treated in this world. And I always get really excited on that last slide and get through intersectionality. But again, it's just thinking about those overlapping identities and adding and acknowledging the complexities of these overlapping identities and how there needs to be unique and specific reactions to some of those. Awesome. So we're just going to go through a few kind of useful little tips and tricks to help support queer plus and trans plus folks in your circle, things you can put in your toolkit to have around you that aren't too overbearing, but can make a really big difference, whether it be in work, community, or wherever you are. First and foremost, make no assumptions, especially when it comes to things like pronouns and names. Lots of people who present very similarly use different pronouns, and lots of people who present very different use the same pronouns. Um, it's just important to take people as the best experts of themselves and really be listening to what folks are saying and adapting that change for them. Using inclusive language, so shifting from hey guys to something like hey folks, thinking of talking about partners or significant others, spouses, all these kind of more gender neutral terms. This is something that does make me think back to my time in medical research. I worked on a very interdisciplinary team. We had a lot of folks coming in and out of the office. And a lot of the times when we were working on projects, at some point we would talk about personal lives and things. And they would talk about their girlfriends and they would talk about their wives. Um, and they would only ever ask me if I had a boyfriend. And that was not my situation at home. And I was really scared to disclose too much. I really felt like if I was honest, I would be perceived really differently in the room. And I could only imagine, the breath I would have let out if one person would have asked me if I had a partner. I just would have known there wasn't an expectation on how I was supposed to be. That small change in language can really help someone feel seen and safe and really heard in that space. And, thinking back, that small shift could also help me actually focus on what I was supposed to be doing there and not worried about letting people know too much about myself. Responding to anti-2S LGBTQ plus behavior. We talked about this when we were talking about allyship. It's that putting your money where your mouth is, that action step that is really important. And there's a few things to consider, when you're thinking about those actions. A big one, again, what you do before, figuring out what the problem is. It's certainly hard to address something if you don't know what's going on. And it sometimes can be easy to be reactive when you can tell something is bad right away. But often it will work better if you just take a moment to kind of triage the situation and figure out what's going to be your best way forward, especially thinking about safety. Try not to judge a person as good or bad. We like to take things as a more of a calling in versus a calling out kind of kind of way. Um, I like to think, for the most part, people want people around them to be okay and safe and healthy. So it's important not to judge the person as good or bad, but the things someone does can be good or bad. The actions can be good or bad. This just gives folks space and like that feeling that they can learn and grow, which is really important because that's what's going to make the biggest change in our worlds and in our cultures and in our spaces. Focusing on the effects is really important. Intentions only go so far. And I think this little diagram in the bottom left does a really good job at making that really clear. So the person on the left is saying, I didn't mean to step on your toe. And the person on the right is saying, well, that doesn't mean it didn't hurt, which is just a really kind of clear way to put it, especially when you're talking about something like stomping on a toe. It makes it almost silly how clear it is for something, and it's just making sure, when you emotionally stomp on someone's toe, you're being accountable for that as well. And the last one, keep calm and cool, which sometimes is easier said than done, but is also really, really important. um, Especially thinking about, again, safety. A lot of the times, if things just automatically pick up heat or get escalated, it can kind of keep escalating, then escalating on escalating, kind of snowball into this place where you really don't want to be and is really not safe for anyone to be in. So keeping that kind of level head and playing it cool is something that's really important to remember too. One of the things I will say before I kind of go past this allyship moment and thinking about safety, there's lots of different ways to make that action step and respond. You know, Sometimes it's going to be a, hey, we don't do that here. There's other times where it won't necessarily be as easy to have that conversation or to break that down right away, thinking about triaging and safety. Um, I had a session with a group of educators not too long ago, and they were talking about they can't always interrupt the class necessarily. Um, and my recommendation was, a teacher death glare goes a long way. You may not say anything, but everyone in the room knows whatever was said was not okay, and you are not having it. So there's lots of nonverbal ways to kind of make that action step too. It's just about making it clear, kind of the culture and kind of the things you accept around you. And of course, mistakes happen. Correct yourself and move on. Change is hard, and that includes good change. So there will be mistakes on the way. I am certainly someone who makes a lot of mistakes. It's just important to be ready and willing to adjust. Again, based on new reputable information, or even thinking about inclusive language, or getting a new pronoun right, or all these kind of speaking things. A really good way to correct yourself is just to restate the sentence saying the right word. I, for a long time, was trying to move from hey guys to hey folks. Again, change is hard. So a lot of the times I would just start out my sessions and go, hey folks, how are you doing today? And at first it feels a little bit weird, like you're a skipping CD or a weird robot. But you get really used to it. And it really helps reinforce what you're actually supposed to be saying, because that is the last thing you are saying, which is the correct word, the correct pronoun. And it also helps the people around you, because the last thing you're saying is also right and also correct. And it just helps enforce what you actually want to be heard. And it's important not to focus too much on that apology part. A sorry is great, but again, the important part is just doubling down on that correct piece and making sure you're getting that information out. We're just gonna whip through some pronouns real quick, just to sure it's a refresher for some folks, new for some other folks. And again, pronouns replace names in sentences. For those of us who are a bit out of our high school English class, as in myself. So we have our gendered pronouns, he, him, and she, her. And then we have our gender neutral pronouns. So the one we're probably most familiar with, they, them. And then we also have things known as neopronouns that are gender neutral. They work the same way as they, them. They're just derived from different language backgrounds. They, them is definitely the most common one you will see. So we have sie, zer, sie, zim, and sie, her. Again, all gender neutral pronouns. They, them is definitely the one you will see the most often, but just important again to know that there are other gender neutral pronouns, so that if someone tells you another one, you can think, oh, I remember seeing those before. Let me get practicing and adjust. Awesome. And this is just a little diagram of how to conjugate some of these pronouns. If we're looking through these, we can really see that once you get one, they all really follow the same pattern. You know, he, him, his, himself, sie, zer, self. It really just follows that same flow. So it's really easy to get that practice in. Once you do it a few times, it really reinforces itself. Amazing. Okay, I do want to go over a few pronoun myths that I have heard in my travels here in New Brunswick. One I get all the time is they, them pronouns aren't singular. You know, I think a lot of us know they, them pronouns are used singularly all the time, especially when you're referring to someone and you don't know their gender. My favorite way to describe this is to take, I usually take my phone. Here's my keys. So if I have my keys, and let's pretend we don't know whose keys these are. Oh no, someone forgot their keys here. I hope they come back for them. No matter where we are, I don't think anyone's thinking 4 different people are running back for a set of house keys. You know, so when we don't think about it, we're using they, them a lot for individuals. It's just about retraining some of those connections in our brain to do it on purpose, to make the people around us feel a little bit more seen, included, and safe. There's no one LGBTQ plus here. We don't need to use pronouns. And I mean, pronouns are part of the English language, but regardless, according to the last census, 4% of Canadians are LGBTQ plus. And if we think about traditionally how census data, the turnout for census data, and thinking about folks who maybe who are closeted and had the survey filled out for them, I would say it's fair to say that number would likely be a little bit higher. But even at the 4%, statistically, you're interacting with the LGBTQ plus community every day. And learning how to use pronouns or learning some inclusive language are little steps that you can take to make people feel, you know, some more safety and comfort in their spaces around them. And you'll see in that corner there, and important to note as well, and this is New Brunswick specific, but in our New Brunswick student wellness survey from 2022, 21.9% of students in grade 6 to 12 identified as part of the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. You know, that's over 1 in 5 students. So, and I had a teacher tell me something that really stuck with me recently, that the little ears are always listening. And I think that's very true. So when we're thinking about using this language and talking about folks and thinking about inclusion and thinking about, you know, we may not think we have queer, trans plus people in our circles. We do statistically. And if you think you don't, I definitely would challenge you to reflect and think why maybe people aren't comfortable being their full selves around you. Because again, statistically, we know that people are interacting with the queer and trans plus community every day. And we should really be able to get to this place where we have this society and culture that is thriving on this inclusivity, that everyone can just show up as their full selves. and no one would say, well, there's no one LGBTQ plus here. And then, of course, I can tell who uses what pronouns just by looking at them, which we know isn't true because there isn't just one way to be or to present. Uh, Folks with similar presentation can use completely different pronouns, and folks with entirely different presentations can use the same pronouns. It's all about what makes you feel like you and like you can show up and be your best. And again, just taking people at their word and taking them as the best experts of themselves. There are some school kids at the table next to us at McDonald's practicing their friends' new they them pronouns. If we practice nail them, think of how happy they'll be on Monday at school. I love this little this little picture. It makes me really happy. And I think it really shows this idea that, sometimes things need practice, and that's okay to have to do. It doesn't mean you're behind. It doesn't mean you don't know. It doesn't mean any of this. It's everyone has to learn. Change, again, good change is hard. And I think this also shows a lot thinking about that there's this misconception sometimes that our younger generation or the kids kind of just get it, or just smarter than us about this kind of stuff. And I don't think it's that. I think it's really, we have a younger generation of folks who have a really high level of empathy for the people around them, and just want to go sit at the McDonald's so their friend has someone who's using their correct pronouns right after they come out. And I think we can take a lot of inspiration from that for ourselves and just take those little moments to be empathetic and to be a little bit vulnerable, to say, yeah, I'm really bad at using they them pronouns. I really need to sit down and practice and go over some of these things. I think that's what's going to make the biggest difference in the world, is that combination of empathy and vulnerability to grow. Perfect. And then just briefly to talk about outings, it's super important to think about folks' safety. Um, an outing is when you reveal someone's gender identity or sexuality to another person. This can be intentionally or unintentionally, but the thing is, it's without explicit permission from the person. And outing someone is always a safety concern. Unfortunately, today, a lot of folks still can't be completely out in every aspect of their lives. So again, thinking back to letting people be the best experts of themselves, that's including their own information. So let them be in control of how, where, and when that's shared. Again, emphasizing this as much as I can. Huge for safety and important to be cognizant of. Perfect. So navigating systems as a queer plus or trans plus person can be incredibly difficult. Navigating systems is my fancy way of saying doing stuff. There's absolutely more information for sure as well. I think it's a nice little combo. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat. I love it. So navigating systems as a queer plus trans plus person can be incredibly difficult. So constant misgendering by strangers, or even worse, family, friends, coworkers, acquaintances. Being unable to select the correct gender marker on forms. A lot of the times, especially around here, we still have the check boxes male and female. Sometimes we'll get that third checkbox other, which I think there can definitely be some better language around. Because if you're filling out a form, you're going male, no, female, no. I guess I'm other. For a group of folks who've been othered for so long, it's just a little bit hard. Being told which resources do or do not apply to you because of your perceived gender. I'm just going to move my lamp over, sorry. We're getting past 4 p.m. in New Brunswick, so it's turning pitch black. Being told which resources do or do not apply to you because of your perceived gender. So for me, I am someone who is assigned female at birth. Part of my healthcare is receiving regular pap tests. The last time I went to book one at my family doctor, and I asked to book a pap test, the admin looked at me like I had 17 heads. Uh, and then I had to very quickly like explain myself and justify why I needed this healthcare, which was really awkward to do in front of like the waiting room of people. When if we kind of just went through the steps and she just asked me my name next or my Medicare or any of my identifying information, they would have had everything they needed to know I did need the service. Or no, I didn't, and just go through the process and give me the information without having these assumptions. Being called the wrong name every time you need to show ID. Um, for a lot of folks who transition, a name change can be part of that. Um, and getting the some documentation and IDs and paperwork caught up with that can be a bit of a process and take some time. So there can be a time where they don't match up. Again, this goes back to just taking people as the best expert of themselves. Unfortunately, I know a lot of situations for different kind of trans and gender diverse folks that they will give the name they use, and then as soon as they show that ID, someone will switch back to that name, even though they've already told them what name they go by, which is hard. I definitely have a different kind of problem when I show my ID. Every time I show my ID, I get asked what gender I am, and it's never been relevant to the service being received. The last time I was asked my gender was when I was voting, and not a single other person in line was asked that piece of information. And then this last point, continually self-advocating, re-traumatizing, self-outing, explaining, clarifying yourself, which just adds to the exhaustion, and being your own advocate can almost feel like a second job you have for yourself, which can be really hard. And thinking about these things going on in all these systems, and as queer and trans plus people are moving through this world, that's why sometimes, when there is just a genuine slip up or a mistake, there can be maybe reactions that seem a little bit disproportionate to what's happening. It's because it's likely the straw that broke the camel's back for that moment. And just being a little bit empathetic of what's going on in the world, and thinking about the grand scheme of things, and even maybe taking a step back and then coming back to talk about it again, just to give that calmness. It's not always about you, unfortunately, or fortunately, sorry. um, so it's just important to be really cognizant of and think about every now and then. Yes, giving people grace for practice and learning is very important. I really like that comment, and thinking about this calling in kind of culture, like moving away from this calling out, and we need this calling in where we're bringing more allies and more people, and there is a learning curve with that. But as long as people are willing to learn, that goes a really long way. If people are willing to make that change, I love a stupid question. It's great. It's usually never stupid, but it's those building blocks of comfort too, to allow some of those moments and to really get people on the same page. And this is just a little assessment that we do at Chroma when we go through our full allyship and inclusion trainings, just to bring people through some options for next steps. And depending on the groups we're with, the next steps can look very different. It can be very high scale and very kind of low scale. It can be anything from policy to practicing pronouns to Googling some different identities, or looking up flags, or putting up a sign, getting universal washrooms, all these steps that help build that culture and that community of inclusivity. And everyone's on different steps of the journey. So depending on who you are and where you go and what you do, it's going to look different for everyone. But one of my one of my big challenges, I guess, for you folks here today is sometime over the next day or two, take a moment to sit down and think about this session, and think about one way you can take a step in allyship over the next maybe month. What is the one way that you are going to purposefully and very intentionally take a step towards 2S LGBTQ plus allyship. It can be something as simple as adding pronouns to your email signature. It can be looking at your work policy to see if it negatively or positively affects like one gender more than another. It can be systematic. It can be looking at washrooms. It can be really anything, as long as there's that next step. The important part is having an action, and you can build on those actions. It's just getting the movement really started. Amazing. I definitely have a few minutes here for some questions if anyone has them. I've really appreciated everyone being here and attentive and just participating today. It's been really great. Yeah, love defaulting to they them. It's very helpful, I find. Um, Another thing I'll briefly add, especially thinking of people like maybe in healthcare, people maybe giving services to people. There may be some points where people are not comfortable disclosing their pronouns right away, and that's okay. And that's a good moment to remember what pronouns really are, like the English class kind of definition. They're going in there to replace the name. So if they've already given you their name, it's okay just to use that until maybe they're comfortable. It's a good little tool to have in your toolkit. Oh, thank you, everyone. Yeah, we love inclusive language. It's one of those little small effort things that really makes a ripple effect around us. Perfect. Absolutely. I appreciate everyone very, very much. And if no one has any more questions, I am going to say goodbye and go watch some of the other the other sessions that are going on. Awesome. Thank you, folks, so much. Have a great rest of your day. And I really hope everyone's checking out the other sessions as well. Happy Tuesday, everyone.